Welcome. In this session, I am going to continue discussing about the population interactions. So in the last session, I have given a small introduction about these population interactions. So where there is an interaction between different species, right? And these interactions are of various types like commensalism, predation, competition, mutualism, commensalism, and so I'm going to discuss each one of these population interaction in detail. So now let's begin this session with commensalism under population interactions. So first one I'm going to discuss is commensalism. So now what is this commensalism? So let's first look at this definition. So the interaction between two different species in which one species is benefited whereas the other species is neither benefited nor harmed. Is neither benefited nor harmed. So when we see interaction between two different species, so in some interactions one species will get benefit while the other species will not be having any benefit or any harm. So let's look at the examples with which we can understand little more what actually is this commensalism. So the first example which I would like to take is the interaction between the aggregates So these aggregates are birds. Okay, so these aggregates and cattle. So interaction between aggregates and cattle. So here these are birds. Okay, now it's a very common sight seeing, okay, in agricultural fields, right, or in the places where there is a lot of grass and we like to take these cattle for foraging. Now when these cattle like to eat on grass, they will be pulling up the grass. So when they pull the grass, along with that, some part of the soil will also get pulled up. So it means that it comes along with the roots. And uh, under this layer of the soil, we find lot many insects. Birds cannot do this by their own because it will be very hard. In case of cattle, they have that enough power or energy to pull that grass from the soil. So while doing so, it is going to expose the soil below the grass where there will be a lot of insects. And now in this case, the egress birds are going to get that food present in that soil. So when these cattle are foraging, so in this case the cattle, we see here that they are neither benefited. So with this, the cattle don't have any benefit nor they are going to have any harm. So neither they are benefited nor harmed. But coming to these aggregate birds, they are benefited. So hence I say this as a plus, and the cattle, as they are neither benefited nor harmed, as neutral. So that is which will take it as a 0, right? So this is one example for commensalism. Then another example is an orchid growing as an epiphyte on mango plant. So here let's look at interaction between an orchid and mango tree. So this is another example here. So this orchid is an epiphyte. So it means that epiphytes are the plants that grow on other plants. It has weaker stems to get the sunlight, and so it would like to take the help of the mango tree. And we know the mango trees will have a strong trunk and branches, and it can grow on those trunk and branches up so that it can get enough sunlight. So here in this case, the orchid plant, that is an epiphyte, is able to get benefit. So it is able to get enough sunlight so that it is able to perform photosynthesis. But the growing of these orchids on the mango tree will not cause any harm to the mango tree or any benefit to the mango tree. So in this case, the mango tree is neither benefited nor harmed, while this orchid plant, so that grows as epiphyte, is benefited. So hence this is plus, and in this case we'll take as 0. So this is another example for the commensalism, which is an interaction between an orchid and a mango tree. Right, so next we'll see one more example for this commensalism. So this example 1, example 2, and example 3. So this is interaction between sea anemone and a clownfish. Between sea anemone and a clownfish. Okay, so here the sea anemones will be having tentacles. So they have tentacles. We know these tentacles are loaded with the nematocysts, so which can attack the prey and can kill them, right? Now the clownfish will be able to live in between these tentacles without getting harmed, right? And with this the sea anemone will help to protect the clownfish from the predators. Okay, so the clownfish, okay, gets benefited from sea anemone tentacles, because the other predators, whatever, who are behind this clownfish, are not able to catch it, because no predator would like to come and interact with these sea anemones, because of their tentacles loaded with those, okay, nematocysts, and which can cause a lot of injury or even death to those predators. So hence the clownfish is able to get protection from the tentacles of the sea anemone. Now protecting the clownfish by the sea anemone, okay, is not a benefit nor a harm to the sea anemone. So in this case the sea anemone is neither benefited nor harmed, whereas the clownfish is benefited. So it is benefited. So in this case it is 0, right? And even you can take so many even other examples. Okay, so a cattle standing under the tree, so for the purpose of shade. So standing under the shade of the tree, the cattle of course going to get benefit, okay, from this, I mean what I say, the sun, which will be very hot, I mean in the midday, the temperatures and whatnot, there will be scorching sun, so it gets away from that sun by standing under the shade of a tree. uh, okay, by standing in that way, the tree will not get any benefit nor harm. Okay, whereas the cattle standing below it are benefited. So in that way, all that interactions between two different species, where one species is benefited and the other species is neither benefited nor harmed. Okay, so that's about commensalism. Now let's see another population interaction, which is called competition. So let's see the definition of competition. So it is an interaction between organisms or species in which fitness of one is lowered by the presence of another one. So it's an interaction between organisms or species in which fitness of one is lowered by the presence of another one. So in this type of interaction, say suppose there is an interaction between species A and species B. In this case, the species A will have negative impact and species B will also have negative impact, right? So both of the species will be having the impact. Okay, so now let's see this competition, which is of two types. So one, it is called inter-specific competition, and another one is intra-specific competition. Interspecific competition and intraspecific competition. So in this case, interspecific competition, the meaning interspecific is, okay, between two different species. It is between two different species. Okay, so where inter means in between two different species, there is a competition. When coming to intra-specific, so in this case, the intra, which means within, so this will be between the individuals of same species. It will be the individuals of the same species. Whereas in case of interspecific competition, as I said, it will be between two different species. It means that individuals of one species, okay, interacting with the individuals of another species. So I say individuals of one species with the individuals of another species. So that is what I call interspecific competition. So interspecific and intraspecific competition are two types of competitions that exist. So where I told you the intra will be in between the two different species, where intra will be within, within the individuals of the same species. So say suppose if you throw some food, okay, so in the what I say, in the houses or in the homes, we see excess food. So sometimes it happens that we will be throwing this food out. So when you throw this food out, we see that you will see the dogs are running towards. So there will be 3-4 dogs coming out, and once they come to that point, you will see there is a fight between them. So it means that there is a intraspecific competition. And you may also see some pigs running towards that food. Now the pigs and dogs may fight for that food which you have thrown out. Now the point is that the competition, of course, for the food between the pigs and the dogs is called inter-specific competition. So that's the difference between inter-specific and intra-specific competition. So now let's understand in detail about this inter-specific competition. Then later we'll say about intra-specific competition. So under this, okay, we'll see first inter-specific competition. Now, this interspecific competition occurs when closely related, so occurs when closely related species compete for same resource. So occurs when closely related species compete for same resources, okay, that are limiting. So the point of competition comes usually when the resources are limiting, but that is not always true. That I will be talking about shortly, right? And here, in this case, Darwin believed that this interspecific competition is a very important force in organic evolution. So, so Darwin said that this inter-specific competition is very important in organic evolution, which means evolution of a species. So Darwin's theory is that one species in course of time, okay, evolves into another species. Now the point is that, okay, in his observation he found that this inter specific competition plays a very important role in the evolution of a new species from an, okay, older species. So that's what the Darwin has told in his organic evolution theory. So this interspecific competition occurs when closely related species compete for same resources that will be limiting. Okay, and I told you that not always, okay, the competition occurs, right, in the case of limiting resources. So competition can also occur, okay, even if the resources are you know what I say, unlimited, right? So that's, I say, resources need not be limiting for competition to occur. So it need not be, okay, limiting. So whatever that resources need not be limiting. Even if the resources are unlimited, competition can take place, right? And here, as I said, that in the first statement, that closely related species will compete for the same resources that are limited, but that is also not always true. So the point is that even that unrelated species, so I say that totally unrelated species can also compete for the same resource. So totally unrelated species can also compete for same resource. Okay, so even though I said that in the first statement that closely related species are going to compete for the same resource that are limiting, but you know what I said, that always the resource need not be limiting for the competition to occur. Even the resources are unlimited, still competition can occur. And I said that, you know, in as in the first statement, that related species compete, but unrelated species can also compete for same resource. And for this, the resources need not be limiting for a competition to occur. So for this, I would like to give an example in the case, so which I say interference computation. So I call it interference computation. So what is this interference computation? So in this case of interference computation, the feeding efficiency of one species is lowered by the presence of, so the feeding efficiency of one species is lowered by the presence of, okay, another species. So that will have an inhibitory effect on another species. So in this case, the example we will see, so how the feeding efficiency of one species will be lowered by the presence of another species. So here there are visiting flamingos in South American lakes. Visiting flamingos in South American lakes. So these flamingos will be moving for the purpose of food to these South American lakes. Okay, and in this case, the lakes already have fishes, right? And in the lakes, the food is zooplankton. So for these flamingos and also the fishes in that lakes, okay, the flamingos in the lakes, I mean they have gone there for the purpose of getting the food, and already in those lakes there are fishes present. So these flamingos and fishes are going to compete for the food. So that food is zooplankton. The food is zooplankton, and this food is abundant in the lake. So there is nothing like it is going to get limited and going to have a competition, but the point is that the food is present abundantly, right? But what happened is the feeding efficiency of these fishes becomes less. The feeding efficiency of these fishes become less when these flamingos are going to visit those lakes, okay, to get that food, zooplankton. So that's what, even the resources are unlimited, still the competition can occur. One more example we will see in this case. So another example, so that's between Ebbington tortoise. So between Ebbington tortoise and goats, an interaction between the Ebbington tortoise and goats in Galapagos Islands. Right now, what happened is, of course, the number is very much considerable and significant of these Ebbington tortoises in the Galapagos Islands, right? When the goats were not introduced here. We know that the Ebbington tortoises, whatever that the tortoises, they are going to have a slower feeding habit. So they slowly move and they slowly take up the leaves, they slowly chew, and all this will be very much slower when compared with the goats. So goats have, okay, greater feeding efficiency. So they are going to have greater feeding efficiency, whereas the Ebbington tortoises, they are going to have a very less feeding efficiency. So they cannot feed as fast as these goats. Okay, so these Ebbington tortoises are not going to feed as fast as these goats. So for that reason, what happened in course of time after introduction of goats into the Galapagos Islands, these abundant tortoises, okay, they became extinct. So they became extinct in a short period of time because the goats have a very high feeding efficiency, and the abundant tortoises are not so good at feeding. So in that case, they have become extinct. So that's another example for that. Okay. Now, so there is a small concept what I say as a competitive release. So it's a competitive release. So what happens, when there are interactions between two different species in which one species is superior and one species is inferior. So when there is a competition existing in between these two, so what will happen with the inferior, what I say, species, with the inferior species? So let's see that under this competitive release. So the point is that a species distribution is going to be restricted to a small geographical area due to presence of a competitively superior species. So when there is a competitively superior species present in that geographical area, then the distribution of the inferior species will be restricted to small geographical area. So when competitively, okay, so when competitively superior species exists in a or in an area, then the inferior species distribution is restricted. The inferior distribution, so the inferior species distribution is restricted. Okay, so it is just like, if I take an example of a business. So if a person who is very much, highly grown in that particular business, he will not allow the other small business to come up. Okay, the point here, in a similar manner, okay, so here when a competitively superior species exists in an area, so in an area, the inferior species distribution will be restricted to a small geographical area, a small geographical area. Okay, so now let's see in this case, so what happens when that superior species, will this distribution will be restricted to all the time to small geographical area for this inferior species, or it's going to get, okay, or going to get extended this geographical area. It can happen when this superior species is removed from that geographical area. So if I'm going to remove this competitively superior species from that area, then the distribution of this inferior species is going to expand. So that is what if that a person, I mean a business or a company that is a giant company, if it falls off, then it will all other small companies who are almost in the same business, they can start growing up. So that's what happens, okay, in nature too. You know what happens when competitively superior species, as long as it is present, so other species, okay, will not be able to compete or expand their geographical area. But if you are going to remove that superior species, then this inferior species distribution is going to get expanded. So for this case, a scientist named Connell, he did an experiment, okay, on the rocky sea coast of Scotland. So let's see an example for this one. Okay, so here a person named Connell. So a person named Connell did some experiments. So experimented on rocky sea coast. So he experimented on rocky sea coast of Scotland area. Okay, so where he found two barnacle species. So in that rocky sea coast area, there are two barnacle species living. So the barnacles are species that belong to arthropoda group. They belong to arthropoda group, and one of that species is the balanus. So out of these two species, one is balanus, and another species is cathamalus. Another species is cathamalus. So now the point is that this balanus is the superior species, and I'm sorry, is the superior species. So balanus is the superior species, whereas the cathamalus is the inferior species. So now the point is that this superior species, that is balanus, is going to exclude the smaller barnacle from that zone. So this superior species excludes the smaller barnacle, okay, cathamalus is going to exclude that smaller barnacle cathamalus, right? So I hope that part is clear. I'm sorry, right? So this balanus, which is a superior species, is going to exclude the smaller barnacle, that is cathamalus, from that rocky sea coast of Scotland. Next we'll see another concept, so what's called the Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. So Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. So Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. So that was actually proposed by Gauss. So, so that was proposed by Gauss. So according to him, what actually is this competitive exclusion principle? So he states that when two closely related species are competing for the same resource, so when two species are competing for the same resource, what happens is they cannot coexist indefinitely. So one of the species which will be inferior will become extinct. So that's what he observed, and what he tells is that, okay, so when two closely related species, so when two closely related species are competing for the are competing for the same resource, competing for the same resource, right? uh, they cannot coexist indefinitely. So they are going to, okay, they will be not able to, see living indefinitely, okay, when resources are especially limiting. So in this case, sorry, indefinitely, when resources are limiting, and ultimately what happens is, ultimately the inferior species becomes extinct. So ultimately the inferior species is going to become extinct, or it will be eliminated. Okay, so that's what the Gauss's competitive exclusion principles. He tells that whenever related species are competing for the same resource, they will not be able to coexist for a very long time. So what happens in that case, when the resources become limiting, what happens is finally the inferior species is going to become or get eliminated or becomes extinct. But whether it is true in all the cases, okay, so here the latest studies are not actually supporting this principle. So that is Gauss's competitive principle, because no species on this planet would like to simply get extinct, right? So in this case, the latest studies has told us a new way. So whatever that inferior species, it is not going to get eliminated, but in fact it will develop new techniques or methods to coexist. So what are those things? So let's see. Now in that case, when that competition exists between, okay, two different species for limited resources, so according to the Gaussis, he says that one of the inferior species is going to get eliminated, but that will not happen usually in nature. So how is that possible? It is by something called resource partitioning. So there is a concept called resource, okay, partitioning. So this resource partitioning is the one. It's a resource partitioning, okay, mechanism. Okay, partitioning mechanism. So this resource partitioning mechanism, so what it tells is that when such a competition exists between two different species, and of course for a limited resource or for the same resource, they avoid competition by choosing different feeding patterns. Okay, so this is where we see that the two competing species, okay, are going to choose different feeding patterns. So they are going to choose different feeding patterns, okay, to eliminate that competition between those species. So now that was actually proved by a person named MacArthur. A person named MacArthur, what he showed is that there are some five closely related species of warblers. So warblers are birds, small birds. They are small birds, warblers. Five closely related species of warblers, okay, living on same tree. So all of them are living on same tree. So all these five related species of warblers living on same tree are able to avoid competition and coexist by the behavioral differences in their feeding activities. So all of them are, so they avoid competition and, okay, coexist due to, okay, behavioral differences in the feeding habits. So due to behavioral differences in the okay, feeding habits. Okay, some of them, may feed on fruits, some may take up, insects, and there are types of insects on them. So like this they have avoided, what I say, the competition among themselves by changing their behavioral differences in their feeding habits. So by eating on different parts of the plant, and they were able to coexist on the same plant. So earlier, in case of that Gauss's a competitive exclusion principle, what he said, that when that competition exists between, okay, two different species, the inferior species is going to get eliminated or become extinct. But that is not true. So as I told you that the species, any species will not be or doesn't like to get extinct. So until unless the conditions and many factors all will act on it for their extinction, otherwise they're not going to get extinct. They try to develop new mechanisms to avoid such process, right? So that's all about this inter-specific competition. So in the next session I'll discuss about intra-specific competition and also other population interactions we will see in the next session.